don't want to make them feel bad or anything, but you have to. It's kind of funny.
Great.
How's it been on the board the first couple meetings here?
It's been good. The first one, there was only a couple of us here.
I know. This is my first time being here with all the new commissioners. I missed that meeting
And then last one, I had to call in. And myself and Commissioner Edlin. I was the only one here besides Chair Kelly. Found out the usefulness of the mute button on the phone.
what?
Mentioned last night, we did have our third open house for the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan, and there was a presentation on the preferred development concept. We'll actually see that in a minute, so we don't want to talk about it too much, but Sarah Harper will be up here in a minute to talk about that. But we're making a ton of progress on what's a very public process designed to solicit input on the development in and around the post office site, and there's been a lot of great work done, so we're looking forward to hearing that presentation in a minute. And then one other piece of news before I get into a kind of a list of upcoming events. An ex-PDC staff person here, somebody who worked for PDC for a long time and as a manager of our economic development team, after I became executive director, her name is Jennifer Nolfi. She was just named the director of Portland State University's Athletic and Outdoor Program, which is their focused certificate program, I believe, on the athletic and outdoor industry. U of O, I think, has a program as well, and so it's nice to see our universities are stepping up to respond to what industries need in the local economy. Jennifer truly is one of the most expert people in that industry. She worked on that cluster at its earliest stages here at PDC, so congratulations to Jennifer. Just a quick run through of some events that are coming up. Tomorrow night is the Hispanic Chamber's Hispanic Heritage Dinner. It's an annual celebration that the Hispanic Chamber has every year, so that's tomorrow night. On Saturday, you could spend your whole day doing public events if you wanted to. In the morning, the Orange Line kicks off for TriMet. So they're having a big series of events all day on that. If you want to go catch the first ride, I think in Milwaukee, you can do that early Saturday morning. Their website is called catchtheorange.com, so you can go check that out. I know they're sponsoring a number of things. They're trying to get a lot of visibility for the opening of the new Orange Line. I think tonight they're having a light show on the bridge as well. NAYA, the Native American Youth and Family Center, is having their annual community powwow on Saturday afternoon as well, and they do lots of different celebrations there. They have a kind of a small business fair as well, and then they do an honoring ceremony for all their partners. And then at the Portland Mercado, they're doing the Taste of Latin America event on Saturday as well, and you can go to the portlandmercado.org website to find out about that. We've been promoting that. And then I think on Saturday there also is the annual Jambalaya Fest at, I think it's at Dawson Park, for the Meals on Wheels fundraiser, so that's another annual event that we support. And then lastly, in terms of upcoming events, at the end of the month, the Latino Network is having their annual dinner, which they call Noche Bella. It's a fantastic event. It's only a few years old, but they do a great job, raise a lot of money for a great organization that's doing a lot, particularly around educating Latino youth. So that's September 25th, the evening of September 25th. And so I want to take a minute and actually talk about something that was posted on the Oregon Live. I'm assuming it's going to appear in print at some point in the Oregonian, and I gave the board heads up that I was going to take a few minutes to talk about this. But there was an opinion piece written by a former PDC chair, John Russell. John Russell's picture's up there on the wall over there. And the topic that John wrote about was what he referred to as the dearth of public sector project managers, and it specifically called out PDC and a number of other bureaus and the mayor's office for having lost all of its great project managers. And, you know, a lot of things get written about PDC in the paper and on all sorts of media. We typically don't respond. It's part of being in this job and in this role that people get to have an opinion about your work, and so we wouldn't normally talk about something like this. But it's not really the criticism of the work that has me responding. It's that Mr. Russell specifically called out the talent and expertise of the people on this staff, and I think that certainly warrants a response. So he writes, in my opinion, in PDC, PBOT, and the mayor's office, the project manager roles have largely been replaced by policy people who are adept at dealing with budgets and the ongoing policy issues facing city council, but who don't have the talent and the experience to make visions realities. And then Mr. Russell cites a long list of exemplary project managers from the past who got work done, contrary to what he thinks is happening now. So I just thought I'd take an opportunity to highlight the actual work that's happening now by project managers who are on staff right now in this agency. And I'm going to start with somebody who I would put up against any project manager that Mr. Russell lists in his article, and that's Lisa Abloff, who, I mean, the list goes on and on about what Lisa's done for this organization, but she and her partner Geraldine Moyle and her team recently completed the negotiation of a development agreement with Zidell, which many people, including people on the list that Mr. Russell cites, said would never happen. People believed we would never have a development agreement that would produce development on that site. Lisa and her team oversaw that for many years. It'll result in basically a million square feet of new development on that site and will unlock lots of other development in South Waterfront. But as I mentioned, Geraldine Moyle, who's done a lot of work with Lisa in South Waterfront. All the cranes you see on the east side, if you look across the river and look at the cranes on the east side, the buildings that are now appearing over I-5 at the Burnside Bridgehead, that's all the work of Geraldine Moyle, project manager who led the process to develop the Burnside Bridgehead framework. Once again, project wasn't moving forward under previous project manager. We have Sarah Harpole also on Lisa's team, who throughout her time here has led projects like Centennial Mills and others, but is now, you'll see her in a minute, she's going to present on the post office, and just a little project that we're taking on, as well as the Old Town Chinatown Action Plan, which represents a $50 million investment by this agency, probably leverage another couple $100 million of investment in this neighborhood. We have Shari Shire, who just started here. Experienced project manager, is overseeing all the developments in Lens Town Center with significant help from Jill Chen on our real estate and lending team. We have Irene Bowers, who is now leading the work on Centennial Mills and is also lead person on our Rose Quarter redevelopment work. Susan Kuhn, who for 6 years labored in partnership with the Delta Sisters to oversee the development of the June Key Delta Center in North Portland, the first net zero building in Portland, and one of the first, I think, ever constructed. And she's now overseeing the progress on what is now the Natural Grocer site on MLK Alberta, a development agreement that will be executed this week and will begin construction shortly. These are all people at PDC, and Mr. Russell calls out people outside of PDC, and I just want to highlight, we have people at parks like Trang Lam, who used to work here, or Kia Selly, who used to work here, who are basically responsible for all the capital projects at our Parks Bureau. We have people like at Metro, Hillary Wilton, who is dragging the Convention Center Hotel project across the finish line. And then he calls out the mayor's office, and we have sitting here Jillian Detweiler, who's not a policy person, even though that's her title, because I know Jillian hates to talk about policy. Jillian Detweiler is a project manager who wants to see things built. And so I don't know that I've had anyone in that role who is so adept at project management as Jillian Detweiler. She's now point for the mayor, basically on all the work I talked about, and is negotiating with significant developers, landowners across the city. Obviously, I could go on and on about this, but what I want to point out is that every single example I gave is a woman. And that's because the vast majority of our project managers now are women, and they're all experienced, and they're all hardworking. And in Mr. Russell's list, they're all men. And while it may have been intentional or not intentional, it gives the impression to the reader that all the great work of the past was done by men, and what's lacking now is we don't have any more male project managers. And I think we all in this room know that that's not the case. The challenges that we face today, as opposed to those that existed 20 years ago, involve more than simply getting projects out of the ground. We need to make sure that along with getting things built, that we provide an equitable distribution of benefits and of opportunity, and that requires a different skill set than the project managers needed 20 years ago, and requires us to be partners as much as instigators. And what we have on our team now are people with that skill set, people who know how to get things done, but know how to be partners, know how to think about things like equity and inclusion in our work. And I would undertake any project with any single project manager that we have right now over any of the project managers listed in Mr. Russell's piece. And I'll just end by saying, I think one of the reasons why he wrote the piece was he wanted to honor Vic Rhodes, who passed away recently, and I don't want to suggest that there wasn't great work done in the past. There was. I know many of the people on the list that's in that article. I know them personally, very dedicated public servants. They all did great work, but the great work continues now, and it continues with people who are uniquely qualified to take on the work that matters to the people of Portland today. So I wanted to get that off my chest, but I also wanted to say if I have a chance to talk to John Russell, I would offer him the opportunity to come by and meet any of our staff, and I'd be happy to make that introduction. So with that, I'm off my soapbox, and I'm done.
That's the most soapbox I've had you get on since I've been on this commission.
Ladies.
So I just have to say, and it is a little bit awkward for me because I would count John Russell as a friend, that I basically totally agree with what Patrick had to say, and I think what John doesn't have is the privilege I have to work with all the people that are currently working at PDC and see their strengths and their smarts and their capability and their integrity. So with that, we probably can move on, I think. Unless anybody else want to make a comment about that. Okay, we have one individual who would like to take advantage of our 3 minutes of testimony, Marcus Lee, Jr. Marcus, are you here? Come on up. If you'd have a seat and state your name, and I guess you're here about Block 49.
That's what it used to be called, sir. I am Marcus Eugene Lee Jr., formerly of Georgetown, Texas. I'm familiar with Block 49. I just want to give some background. I presume none of you were on the commission down there on the South Waterfront project. But there is, as intended, no grocery store down there, as even the union representatives do not intend there to be one. There is a convenience store. I've been down there twice in my nice clothes, and they do not take the EBT card. So much for affordable housing opportunities. As is intended, there would be no place there, even by the union representatives on the committee. I will be down there in my nice clothes, and I won't be as polite. It's at Booty and South Waterfront. There's some other issues about construction. I used to be a construction inspector, and I realize, and I'll close with this, that you're going to have a meeting here, a discussion about possibly setting aside some money for affordable housing. And as a former construction inspector here in the state of Oregon, I know that's just complete nonsense. I could say some more, and I'll be down there Saturday morning early. I believe it starts at 11 a.m. in my nice clothes. We can talk then. Thank you for your time. Again, Marcus Eugene Lee, Jr., formerly of Georgetown, Texas.
Thank you very much. So our first regular agenda item is the adoption of the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Program. We have Shelley Hack and Amy Nagy from the staff who are going to come up and talk to us about this, and we have a resolution to approve.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Nagy. I'm a Business Development Coordinator for Clean Tech here at PDC.
And I'm Shelley Hack, Business Opportunity Officer within the Opportunity Cooperative.
And we are here today to ask the board to take action to approve the intergovernmental agreement with Multnomah County to administer the CPACE program, as well as approve the CPACE program guidelines. Just as some background, the Climate Action Plan, which guides the City of Portland and Multnomah County's efforts to transition to a climate-stable future, calls for an aggressive goal of reducing carbon emissions by 80% from 1990 levels by the year 2050. Commercial buildings are a significant source of these emissions and are responsible for about 1/4 of carbon emissions in the county. Buildings need to become more energy efficient. Reducing their energy consumption is paramount to meeting the Climate Action Plan goals. Unfortunately, we are not seeing the breadth and the depth of conservation projects required to be successful. In 2012, PDC commissioned a study to understand the challenges of the region's energy efficiency market and identify how to best apply PDC resources to stimulate increased investment in area buildings. Several challenges were identified in the market, but as it pertains to the financial side of the equation, significant barriers that were identified include, first, the lack of access to capital. Energy retrofit projects commonly require savings from the commonly require a large upfront capital investment that is paid off over time with the savings from the energy conservation measures. However, frequently, owners do not have the capital to make that upfront initial investment and to achieve the deeper and more meaningful savings. Which brings me to the next point, is the return on investment timeline for savings realized is typically longer than an owner's holding period for the building. And this results in a curbed investment and leaves savings on the floor. And finally, perhaps the most common challenge we hear nationwide is the split incentive issue. This is where the owner is responsible for the cost of the energy measures, yet the tenant realizes the benefits through a lower energy bill. CPACE was recommended to PDC as a tool to help owners overcome some of these barriers and initiate projects. CPACE is a public financing mechanism that uses the property tax structure to secure financing for energy improvements in privately owned commercial buildings. A CPACE loan is secured by a benefits assessment lien that is superior to other encumbrances, and it does require the consent of senior lien holders. It can provide up to 100% financing for projects, with the savings from the energy reduction being used to repay the loan. One of the more appealing aspects is that since the loan is tied to the property and not just the business, the loan stays with the building and can be transferred with ownership. This allows for owners to undertake larger retrofit projects that have a greater impact on reducing the building's energy use. PACE is a national tool that's being used throughout the U.S. in both residential and commercial markets. There are 15 states with funded projects, and we're seeing an exponential growth in the amount invested through PACE programs. The state of Oregon enacted a law in 2009, which gives local governments the legal authority to set up financing districts to enable a PACE program. And with board approval today, this would establish the first CPACE program in Oregon. PDC has been working in partnership with Multnomah County and the Energy Trust of Oregon to design a county-wide program. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the team members for their commitment and partnership to date. From the county, we have Commissioner Jules Bailey. We have John Wasutinsky, Director of Sustainability, as well as Sam Barrasso and Tim Lynch, who are Senior Policy Managers. From ETO, we have Peter West, the Director of Energy Programs, and Sam Walker, who's a Senior Project Manager. During the time that PDC had commissioned the study for energy efficiency, Multnomah County was actually also contemplating a CPACE program, so it made sense to pursue a program jointly. Therefore, under the scenario, the county will provide the legal authority to stand up the program as well as the collection mechanism should a project go into default. PDC will act as a program administrator as well as a lender. And then, as you know, ETO has been a key actor in Portland as well as the state's energy efficiency market and has a robust infrastructure to identify and execute projects. We will be using their building assessment and evaluation services for the pilot. In building a local CPACE program, we're seeking to leverage the existing organization's capacities, competencies, and resources. And this partnership provides the talents and abilities needed to set up the program. In terms of program objectives, we've identified the following that will help shape the design of this program. The first is to create a cost-effective financing tool for building owners. The second, stabilize building infrastructure and reduce our carbon emissions. Stimulate new business development and job creation. And finally, leverage the capacities and create partnerships between public, private, and nonprofit sectors. So Shelley will go ahead and talk a little bit about market opportunity as well as go in depth on the pilot program itself.
Yes, so in 2012, the county commissioned a study from Eco Northwest to assess the commercial building stock in Multnomah County. That study revealed over 8,300 commercial buildings, which excluded multifamily and industrial properties. And of that, it identified approximately 2,800 inefficient buildings, and inefficient being defined as those buildings that had higher than average energy consumption and no evidence of having been retrofit in the past 5 years. This is what we're defining as our primary market. Okay. Okay. So the information from Eco Northwest was supplemented with information from the Canvas group to evaluate the potential savings and how much that savings could potentially finance. What we concluded from that analysis is that the cost savings for buildings below 10,000 likely didn't pencil because the cost savings achieved would not be adequate to cover the cost of the improvements. What we did discover is that we assume that there's going to be that the cost savings for buildings between 10 and 50,000 square feet appears to generate enough cost savings to cover approximately somewhere between 100 to 350,000, depending upon the use of the building, and that the market above 50,000 square feet likely had capital needs beyond the scope of the pilot, and that we would be evaluating that market at the end of the pilot to see how we might be able to serve that as well. So what we're proposing is that we pilot the program for a 24-month period, that we allocate $3 million in the budget from the multiple urban renewal areas, that we fund up to 10 transactions. And our goal is that we have a variety of building types as well as project scopes. The idea of the pilot is that we experiment and we learn through that experimentation about what works and what doesn't. During the period, the pilot period will also be investing our efforts in enrolling a strong certified contractor pool that would support the program ongoing. So what's next? If approved, we see the program development in a couple of distinct phases. The research and planning phase is coming to a conclusion, that we'll be moving into the program development phase. After that, there'll be program testing and refinement of our strategies based upon what we've learned, and with the desire of moving into full integration into the operating departments at the end of the fourth phase. Okay. So there's a number of design elements that we'll be focusing on as we move into the pilot. Those design elements include developing a certified contractor pool, a program, looking at a long-term capitalization strategy, refining marketing and outreach, as well as our lending and internal infrastructures. So this table gives you a sense of what we anticipate happening in each of those design phases, as well as with each of the elements. And I want to focus your attention to the contractor capacity and the capitalization strategies. That's where the staff will be focusing most of its attention during as we move into this second phase of development. So on the contractor capacity, we anticipate convening a group of stakeholders to help us shape this effort. That would include developing a comprehensive list of both prime and subcontractors that are working in this area and identifying where there may be gaps in the technical capacity of the pool. We'll also be looking to this group to help us establish goals and production and other goals during the pilot. One of the national best practices that we discovered during our research is the use of the contractor pool as a primary delivery system. And so part of what we'll also be developing during this phase is a training program to educate contractors about what the program is so that they can use it as a tool for closing deals. The other design element that will receive immediate attention is in developing the long-term capitalization strategy. Our desire is to see this program operating county-wide, and we recognize that tax increment resources are inadequate to do that. So we will be exploring 3 different capitalization options and seeing if there are others out there that we haven't heard of yet. One of those options is a private lender model that would engage private lenders in the program and allow them to use a security structure to originate transactions. The other idea that we'll be exploring is a securitized bond sale, where we would originate transactions, aggregate them, and then sell a pool of a bond secured by those loans. And then a private placement model, where some of the larger financial institutions that are more active in this area have begun to develop, in essence, like a line of credit. You can deliver the loan as it's originated for sale to that organization. So we'll be evaluating that as well. And then at the same time, we'll be looking at establishing our branding, looking at our marketing strategy, as well as evaluating our lending infrastructure. One of the key elements on the lending side is that we will need to create the loan document so that we can actually close a transaction and service a transaction. Okay. Move. Okay, so what will success look like at the end of the 24-month period? We hope to close 6 loans, have 6 loans approved. We hope to have 4 projects complete or in construction, 2 private lenders enrolled, the certified contractor pool operational, and that the program has been moved into internal operations. These seem like somewhat modest goals, but by achieving them, we will have built the foundation and the infrastructure to support a strong program going forward. So to repeat, we're here today seeking your approval of an intergovernmental agreement with Multnomah County to administer the program, as well as the program guidelines that would guide PDC's lending during the pilot phase. We also have a number of invited guests that would like to speak in support of the program. It includes Multnomah County Commissioner Jules Bailey, Susan Stewart, the Executive Director with Oregon Building Owners and Managers Association, or more formally known as BOMA, Peter West, the Program Director with Energy Trust of Oregon.
Commissioners, any questions before we bring up some testimony? Okay, thank you. We'll first have Commissioner Jules Bailey. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. For the record, I'm Jules Bailey, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 1, and also for the record, it's incredibly daunting to be sitting here in front of a panel of people that know more about building construction and building financing than I ever will in an entire lifetime, so go easy on the questions. I'm really, really excited to be here today. This has been a long time coming. And there's a lot of history here behind this, dating all the way back to Governor Kulongoski's energy efficiency work group back in 2006 and 2007 that resulted in a collaboration in the legislature that first enabled PACE statutes in House Bill 2626 in 2009. At that time, the term PACE didn't even exist, and so you won't find that in statute. We described them in another way and in some very early and proto ways. But actually, I think it's appropriate to be here today after Director Quinton's opening remarks, because we took an idea that was policy, and now we're sitting before you with a real program, with implementation, with stakeholders that are excited to embark on it. And we wouldn't be sitting here today without Lisa Obloff, who you mentioned, who came to the legislature and advocated with her team for the changes that were necessary to the program to make it functional and to make it something that private lenders could do, and also to build in the idea of a seismic component with energy efficiency. And I believe that if we implement this eventually with a seismic component, which is allowed under statute, will be one of the first jurisdictions to combine energy efficiency and seismic upgrades in a single financing tool, and that's very exciting. But really, this is the story of collaboration to get here, and I'm very grateful to PDC for pushing this, for taking the lead, and for being the perfect program administrator for this program. It is a program that really combines the strengths that you bring to the table with the mechanisms and the strengths that we bring to the table, and it's a good partnership. I want to thank the team at PDC that has put this together and done all the hard work, Director Quinton and Lisa, who I mentioned, Shelley and Amy, who have put in countless hours to get the IGA right and to make this a program that will be functional. And that partnership includes a strong partnership with the Energy Trust of Oregon, leveraging the expertise that they bring to the table and the value that they bring to ratepayers in investing in cost-effective energy efficiency, and Peter West will be here shortly to say more. And finally, you'll hear from Susan Stewart with BOMA as well. And I can't emphasize enough how important that aspect of the partnership is. What we have here is a voluntary program. What we have here is a tool. The tool doesn't come out of the toolbox unless there's a reason to use it and without demand. We need to make sure that a critical part of this program is the outreach to building owners to make a streamlined, cost-effective tool that is easy for them to use and that they will want to use on their buildings. And so I'm grateful to her and her membership for their interest in and enthusiasm for this program. And I think it's an excellent part of the partnership with PDC that we leverage your experience in working with building owners to be able to bring this together. So this CPACE program really is the sweet spot of how we address our building infrastructure challenge, how we upgrade for safety, how we upgrade for performance, and how we meet our climate goals that this city and county are so committed to meet under our joint climate action plan. And I finally want to say another thank you that as we look to create jobs through our commercial PACE program, that this isn't just about creating any jobs. This is about creating good jobs and about creating jobs for community, for a population that reflects our community. PDC has been a leader on pushing for high road agreements and equity standards that I think will be part of what makes this a national model and one to replicate. So you have my thanks. Thank you also to John and Sam and Tim, who are here today from our team, and to Chair Kafori for giving us the ability to run with this. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So I guess I have one question. I'm excited about this program getting off the ground.
Yeah.
I think of it in the same way as the residential energy retrofits. We're doing a couple thousand. That's going to take us somewhere around 400 years to get all the houses in Oregon that can be that need an energy retrofitted. What's your vision of the scale of this program once it's gone through the pilot?
It's a great question, and as somebody who just retrofitted their home for energy efficiency and had a fantastic experience with it, I can tell you there's, I think, a real opportunity here to make this a program that is easy for building owners. And as we look at the scale that's out there, you saw some of the numbers on the slide. it is possible that after we get moving on this, that we'll have a similarly robust program that can be out there addressing that sweet spot of need in those mid-scale commercial buildings. You know, a lot of the larger buildings, they have access to capital, they have dedicated energy managers. You know, for folks that are, especially in this area, in some in East County, if we are able to someday to bring the program there, in the Central East Side industrial area, those are the kinds of buildings that I think we've got a real opportunity here to do. And I think having this partnership and then potentially expanding to private sector financing, really the sky's the limit.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jules.
Thank you.
So why don't we have both Peter West and Susan Stewart come up? Hello again. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to let you two choose who goes first.
I get to go first. I said it first.
Okay.
Tyranny of the alphabetical
That's
order.
right. We are in the alphabetical order, and mine is much shorter. I'm Susan Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of BOMA, Oregon. BOMA is 100 years old this year, and I represent over 43 million square feet of commercial space in Oregon. And I'm preaching to the choir, so I'm going to be very brief. You obviously know the benefits of this program. A couple props for BOMA. In 2007, we started the very first energy efficiency contest in the United States. Out of 93 BOMAs and other organizations, we were the very first. We partnered with Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. We've spent the last 8-9 years educating our members on the benefits, the benchmarking, all those things. So we are obviously a very strong proponent of energy efficiency. My members fall into two camps. You have your larger, sophisticated owners. They understand, they have the resources, the knowledge to secure financing, for the most part. Those are generalizations. There is a whole group of owners that we have struggled to reach, building members, BOMA members and non-BOMA members, with programs like this. And that's where my concern is. We have been unsuccessful. I'm concerned that the outreach is not going to be there to target specific owners, and that would be my one. You know, we want to help any way we can. I don't know how to reach those owners on the east side. I look out my window, I see their buildings. It's like, how, sort of knocking on their door, how do I get to them? But we're working on that. When we reach them, which we will eventually, it's a great opportunity for them to invest in their assets and to increase the value. But again, I'm preaching to the choir, so I will stop now.
Thank you. Mr. West.
Well, we're not as old as Susan. We've been around since 2002. Chair Kelly, commissioners, thank you for having us, and thank you for entertaining CPACE. Just a little bit about Energy Trust, and then I'll go on to why we care and why this is important to us. We're a statewide organization that supports businesses, homeowners, almost any customer of utility of Pacificorp, PGE, Northwest Natural, or Cascade Natural Gas to get clean energy through energy efficiency or on-site or off-site generation. Since 2002, we've saved enough energy and generated enough energy to fully serve 470,000 households, fully the city of Portland. This is equivalent to a large power plant. This power plant comes with 0 carbon emissions. It comes from energy efficiency and renewable energy. We built one power plant. Our goal over the next 10 years is to build another power plant. And that's why we care about CPACE. We know the tools we have that work. We also know there's a set of customers, just like Susan's looking out her window, we look at our window and knock that on those doors, and we're not quite reaching them. And we need new tools, and we're very excited about this, and we're very excited the partnership with PDC and the county commissioners. And I deeply appreciate the staff. Thank you, Patrick, for bringing that up. I have staff as well, but worked quite hard on this. And this is a pilot. This is a new idea. It required legislation. It required fixing legislation. It required patience. All of those things for implementation that a really valuable project manager brings and brings and brings again. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work well done. What we bring is cash incentives, evaluation services, And this network of 2,500 businesses that do energy efficiency and renewable energy, they're engineers, they're contractors, they're architects, they're energy designers. Collectively, they employ 12,700 people statewide in Oregon. This is the network we've built up. Energy Trust doesn't turn the wrench. We need tools like this, but we have a private sector model. And what I appreciate about the whole approach from my staff, Susan's, yours, and Jules, we're going to leverage that. We're going to leverage what exists, what we have in Oregon already. We're going to leverage the things that already work for us to create something that can work better, to find where we have holes. And where we know we have holes are the longer-term financing, the kind of things Shelley pointed out. I'm not going to repeat those. They're exactly the things we need to move forward. Appreciate the design principles, and I appreciate that you're going to use the private sector lending network as well and try to unleash that. In the long term, that's where we want to go. We want that network to think this is absolutely a no-brainer. And I started the solar program at Energy Trust in 2002. Not a single financial institution would lend on a solar system. Big barrier. People actually hid their loans for those. We started a project with Umpqua Bank, Green Street Lending. Right now, it's a no-brainer. Private sector wants to lend on these. People don't default on solar systems. It's a great buy for a bank. We want the same thing here. How big can it be? We went from about a dozen solar solar systems we did in our first 2 years to we've done now 7,000. We regularly do 1,200 a year. It can get big. It can get big when you unleash the potential to think differently. I expect that this pilot will challenge us, to lean on a quote from a former Secretary of Defense, you don't know what you don't know. And we don't know a bunch about these customers. And I suspect what we're going to learn is Energy Trust is going to have to change. We'll probably have to come up with a different kind of contractor, perhaps. I don't know. But every time we've been challenged by the market and challenged by partners like BOMA and the county and you, we've gotten enough energy for those 470,000 households. I fully believe, this isn't the only tool we need. But if we need that next power plant, if we're going to be a carbon-free economy or a carbon-less economy, we have to do these things. I urge your support, and I deeply appreciate the time your staff has spent. I appreciate mine. I appreciate that he let him go on vacation. That was a mistake. But otherwise, Sam Walker would be here. But I want to acknowledge him as well. It's been a lot of phenomenal thinking. We're going to start small. I'm anxious to get bigger, I think, and faster. But the smarter, calmer folks that are running this program are suggesting let's be modest and then go from there. So I urge your support, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other testimony on this resolution? Well, I just think this is, it fits so well our new strategic plan in a variety of ways. Commissioners, any questions, comments? And the chair is going to entertain a motion.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for coming today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next resolution is 7145, authorizing a grant to Lan Su Chinese Garden. The oft-mentioned Lisa is coming up.
Lisa, star of the show today.
Good afternoon, Chair Kelly and Commissioners. I'm Lisa Abwaf. I'm the Central City Manager with the Portland Development Commission. And I also wanted to acknowledge we have a couple of folks actually from the Chinese Garden here with us. If you have any questions in terms of the status of their project, their operations, et cetera. And just wanted to acknowledge for folks out in the public, because we've kind of mentioned this to you, this was an item that we did plan to bring to you last month and then postponed working on some minor changes with the garden, particularly just around payment terms and timing, et cetera. So the action before you today is to authorize a grant in an amount not to exceed $638,000 from the downtown waterfront urban renewal area towards improvements to the garden and more specifically the Lake Zither, which is kind of that central pond to the garden. So I think most folks know where it's located, but just in case, the Lan Su Garden is a core anchor to the Old Town Chinatown community, its heritage, and its cultural history. It is at Everett and Northwest 2nd and 3rd. The garden's a very active member in the community organization as well and has been a significant partner to PDC as we move forward with implementing the Old Town Chinatown Action Plan that the board approved a couple of years ago. As a bit of background, and just as a reminder, the property on which the garden is situated is actually it's controlled by the City of Portland under a long-term lease. The major assets are owned by the Parks Bureau, who maintain responsibility for major maintenance of them, and then the garden operates and maintains on a day-to-day basis. And further background, and this takes us kind of way back in history in terms of the Old Town Chinatown community and PDC's partnership with the community. We've been a longtime sponsor of the garden and the role that it can play in Old Town Chinatown. The garden was first contemplated in the late 80s into the early 90s as Portland entered into a sister city relationship with Suzhou. And then there were early guiding documents in the late 1990s that did call for the construction of the garden as a regional attractor and anchor in Old Town Chinatown as we sought to bring new visitors and vitality to the district. The groundbreaking of the garden occurred in 1999 and then it opened in 2000. Shortly thereafter, PDC actually provided an additional just over $1 million that assisted with adjacent street improvements, and it also helped to retire a line of credit that the garden had taken out to complete the construction. In 2010 was the 10-year anniversary, and the garden was renamed to the Lan Su Chinese Garden. And what you'll probably hear from the garden is the original installation of the liner had major issues and it has ongoing major maintenance issues in terms of water loss. Last fall, we actually launched what we call the Community Livability Grant Program in Old Town Chinatown. It's the first time that we actually applied it in the central city, and the Lan Su Garden did apply for it, go through kind of a public vetting process, and we had started to commit resources at a much less scale through that public process. The description of the project that kind of is at hand and that they had applied for is a complete replacement of the liner of Lake Zither. The present pond loses approximately 28,000 gallons of water a day, and that translates into a bill to the garden of around $55,000 per year. The new pond will be a full pond versus just a liner, and the garden has committed to us that it'll be watertight, and with that, they'll actually see savings of approximately $40,000 annually. And their goal is to apply these savings towards them being able to fund ongoing maintenance projects at a lesser scale. For example, they've been hoping to refurbish the tea house windows, which would cost them about $30,000. The improvements will happen over the next 2 to 3 months. They're actually planning them for November through January. What you see here are actual cracks and slowly disintegration of the existing liner, which is lending itself to the leakage. The November through January schedule is actually ideal for the garden because the holiday season is actually their slowest season, and they would then be able to open in time for the Chinese New Year events in February. These improvements that are currently contemplated in this grant agreement were originally covered in the mayor's general fund budget, And we identified this project together with two others, one in the interstate urban renewal area and one in Central East Side, that benefited the respective urban renewal areas and were eligible for tax increment financing. That then released 1.4 million of funds to PDC that we were able to allocate both to the startup fund that Patrick mentioned at the beginning of the board meeting, as well as resources for our community development fund. So we saw it as kind of a win-win solution. So again, this requested PDC board action would be to authorize a grant in an amount not to exceed $638,000 towards the repairs of the pond at the Lan Su Chinese Garden. So I'll stop there and probably invite folks up. Yeah.
Questions for Lisa? Thank you. We have Kathy McNaughton, representing the Lan Su Garden, as well as Jane DeMarco. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Lisa's done such a good job at explaining the project. We were prepared to pretty much reiterate what she said. So, because everybody's time is valuable, we're here. Jane is the executive director. I'm president of the Lan Su Chinese Board of Directors. And we're here to, first of all, thank you very much. And also thank Mayor Hale and Commissioner Fritz and all the commissioners, so the City of Portland commissioners, for their support. And just answer your questions. Anything that we can go into more detail, we're happy to do so.
I just hope that liner lasts a long, long time.
It's going to be Gyp Creek, and it should last.
Well, 40 to 50 years is what we think, for the simple reason that it's rebar with poured gunite. With some actual fibers that are in it that actually become really, really watertight. So we are very, very excited about this project. And we're excited about the project not for the simple reason that the pond has never really been right, and this will fix it. But we're excited that sometimes you get an opportunity, you know, like when, Tom, when you redo a kitchen, you get to do the kitchen that you really wanted. So one of the things, apart from the fact that we're sort of going to, you know, solve the leakage issues, we have a really wonderful collection of fish, and we're going to dig a little deeper in a couple of areas so that they can go and hide out there when the weather gets really cold, because we lost a slough when we had very cold weather. And the other thing is that because this is really a man-made garden and a man-made lake, all of the wonderful water lilies and lotus that we have right now get schlepped in and schlepped out, you know, at different times of the year. We have to go in and we've got to move them all and drag them to a greenhouse. So we're going to build in some, you know, some flower beds, some water flower beds, so that some of those water lilies can stay. So the aesthetic is going to be enhanced for our, you know, we're going to see 150,000 visitors this year. We're excited to do it. There are some challenges. The challenges are that when you start to pour this thick concrete, you get a lip, and Chinese gardens have an aesthetic where the water comes up to a flat surface in a very, very clean way. So we're going to have to do some clever manipulation there. And we have all of these bridges that have got supports, and we're going to have to hide the thick concrete around those supports. So we've, you know, we've been in communication with our friends in Suzhou to send us the appropriate rock to do that kind of hiding. So we're excited about the project, and we are just very, very thankful that we get to continue our relationship with PDC. We've not only am I the executive director, but I am on the board of the Old Town Chinatown Community Association, and I've enjoyed for 2.5 years working with staff from PDC on the 5-year action plan. And you know, Kathy and I take the stewardship of the garden very, very seriously, and I take my role as cheerleader for the neighborhood very seriously. So I think that what this does is it continues to grow and develop what we see as sort of like the anchor tenant of a neighborhood that's on the cusp of revitalization. And so, you know, as Lisa said, this sort of like fits this granting from the kindness of the pockets of PDC to the overall work that we're trying to do in this neighborhood. So, you know, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Any More comments or discussion? Chair will accept a motion. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, ayes have it. Motion carries. Our next item is item number 8, an informational update on the tax increment financing set aside for affordable housing policy. We have two of our staff, Kimberly Branham and Tony Barnes, and Javier. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Kelly, Commissioners, Executive Director Quinton. I'm Kimberly Branham, Deputy Director here at PDC, and as you mentioned, I'm joined by Javier Mena, who is the Assistant Director at the Portland Housing Bureau, and Tony Barnes, who's our Chief Budget Officer. Is that right? And we are here to provide an information item to give you an update on the set-aside conversation to date. I'm going to ask for the clicker. So I'm going to provide some context on the background. Javier is going to walk through the investments and results to date. Tony will talk a little bit about the analysis and recommendations that happened as part of the review, some current context considerations, and then I'm going to close out the conversation with comments on opportunities and challenges for each individual urban renewal area, summarize some of what we heard from our budget advisory committees, and then make sure that you have time for discussion. Sorry, can I just take that? Thanks. Okay, so we'd ask that you keep in mind these key questions as this is your first time to talk as a board about this. We'd like to understand what questions you have about the existing policy or implementation to date, what additional information you need in order to provide us with direction, and then if at this date you're able to give us any direction about what changes you would like to see, we'd like to hear that. So if you'll keep that in mind, we'll remind you of these questions at the end of the presentation. So you'll recall that the set-aside policy was adopted by City Council and was effective in 2006. It dedicates 30% of tax increment finance debt proceeds, so new debt, across urban renewal areas with the exception of Airport Way and the Willamette Industrial Urban Renewal Area to affordable housing. Affordable housing is defined, and there are implementation policies there's an implementation plan and income guidelines that's put in place. So home ownership up to 100% is considered affordable, rental housing up to 60%, and there are on urban renewal areas targets at the 0 to 30 and 30 to 60%, and Javier can talk about that as well. There are also allowances for community facilities serving low-income people and homeless. The set-aside policy was to be reviewed every 5 years, and so in 2011, we took another look at the policy and made some administrative changes to make sure that it was a little bit easier to budget, and so we went from an expenditure process to debt proceed model. So rather than having it be based on what PDC was going to expend, we did it on how much debt we would issue. We clarified that 30% was the minimum on aggregate across urban renewal areas, and that changes to individual targets within urban renewal areas could be made by a joint decision or by recommendation from Housing Bureau, Portland Development Commission, and accepted by City Council. So you saw that when we reallocated, for example, $20 million within the interstate urban renewal area. It also called for a review in 2015. And so here we are today. The Portland Housing Advisory Commission began looking at the implementation of the set-aside in July and in August. In August, they made a recommendation that the set-aside should be increased to 50%, which Tony will talk about. We participated, as Chair Kelly mentioned, in a conversation with PHAC on September 1st. We put together our budget advisory committee to get their input on where we are, and obviously we're here before you today. There will be another conversation in front of the Portland Housing Advisory Commission in October. We intend to come back to you as well at your meeting in October, and then there will be a report to City Council on October 21st. So, Javier?
Certainly, there's always questions about what has, first of all, Thank you, Chair Kelly and Commissioners, for the opportunity. There's always questions about what has the Bureau or the city done in terms of the set-aside and what are the outcomes. As we all know, not all URAs are created equal. There are differences. And so what you see in front of you are strategies specifically with the neighborhood urban renewal areas that go beyond just affordable rental development, but also into home ownership and home repair, kind of the home retention component associated with it. At the macro level, we have either rehab, creating new units, or creating new home ownership opportunities to around 5,000 units. And as you can see, the breakdown there. In terms of the specific requirements associated with each urban renewal area, these are the outcomes that we have been able to achieve. However, we have, when we look at the goals associated with each of the urban renewals, we know that on the 0 to 30% goals, we're fall short of those goals dramatically, specifically in some of the urban renewal areas, and on some of the home ownership as well. These are challenges that we encounter through market pressures and some of the other things, but these are the realities. And we don't propose, as we continue to look at next 5 years in changing those percentages, but we want to make sure that we're very clear and transparent as to what those challenges are.
Thank you. So some additional background on the set-aside status and forecast. Currently, the 30% minimum is an aggregate across all URAs, with some URAs targeted at levels below 30% and others above due to the specific characteristics of each URA, such as zoning. Looking at this chart, we see the status as of the 15-16 adopted budget that was adopted in June, the 5-year forecast, the 5-year forecast, and then the 10-year forecast, looking at 25-26. Adding up investment in affordable housing from 2006 to the current budget, there's a total of $275 million that's been allocated through the set-aside for housing from a total base of $800 million. That equals about 34%. And through the 5-year forecast, that number is about 34%. It goes to 35% by the time all URAs expire at the end of the 10-year forecast. That's about $440 million in set-aside housing. The 5-year forecast as well as the 10-year forecast includes the budget decisions that were made through the interstate allocation, the additional $20 million, as well as long-term forecast of allocating additional resources in North Macadam that would equal 42%. Actually, interstate and North Macadam are both over 40% by the end of the forecast as a result of some of the budget decisions. So the 2015 review and findings, the findings were that we met or exceeded 30% aggregate and individual URA targets by expenditure set by policy for all applicable URAs. Investments in 0 to 30 rental are below targets, except for downtown waterfront and South Park Block URAs. So the initial PHB and PDC staff recommendations were to maintain the policy language, strengthen reporting, and link to the state of housing report, secure non-TIF resources, deliver 0 to 30% MFI, and reinforce 30% as the floor. The PHAC recommendations were to set 50% set aside in aggregate across all URAs, retain current income target guidelines, any redevelopment receiving public investment to complete a displacement analysis and making that optional for private redevelopment. And the PHAC would review implementation of set-aside policy annually as part of the annual budget process. So looking at the 50% model, what that equates to, if you look at our budget and forecast through the current fiscal year through 24-25. 24-25 is the last URA expiring, that's North Macadam. Right now, we're forecasting $207 million for housing over that time period, about 35% from 2006 to 2025. With the 50% model, it goes to $289 million, so an additional amount of $82.7 million. So that would make the cumulative total from 2006 to 2025 41%. looking back. I'll set a little bit more context for where we are with the URAs. This is our maximum indebtedness chart. Every URA has a maximum amount of indebtedness that can be issued. As you can see, the districts, the black portion of the district represents debts that's been issued to date. So a majority of debt has been issued in the existing URAs as well as expired URAs such as Convention Center and Downtown Waterfront. The gray represents what we think can be issued from our forecast over the next 10 years in active URAs. That amounts to about $580 million. The white portion is the amount of debt we don't think we can issue based on our current forecast. So there's additional capacity potentially available in Gateway, Lentz, and North Macadam if additional tax growth occurs, assessed value growth occurs. A bit more context. Recently, Council approved a package of URA amendments for 6 URAs that helped accomplish multiple objectives by reducing the impact of urban renewal on taxing jurisdictions, as well as preserving existing commitments for affordable housing and other priorities throughout the urban renewal areas. The amendments resulted in about a net benefit of $197 million over 30 years to taxing jurisdictions by eliminating education URA and reducing River District URA, but also an increased investment in affordable housing and providing resources for development South Waterfront, Central East Side, Old Town Chinatown. And those changes are represented in our budget and forecast. So looking at the long-term picture for TIF resources, to provide a little bit more context, I mentioned there's $583 million in new TIF proceeds we believe we can access over the next 10 years. So the status quo model is the $376.6 million to PDC and the $206.9 million that would go towards a set aside. That's on the left. On the right is the 50% scenario where the additional $83 million would switch from economic development PDC to housing. So housing would be a total of $289.7 million. There's a little piece up on the top of the bar chart that shows $60.8 million. That's the amount of capacity we don't have forecast, but we potentially could access in North Macadam and Lentz if taxable investment occurs to a greater degree in those areas. So potentially there's more resources in North Macadam and Lentz that could be added to the forecast as a result of investment. This is our annual forecast for remaining TIF proceeds. For of that $583 million I mentioned, this is what we have in our forecast for how those resources would come in over the next 10 years. The majority of the resources would be issued over the next 5 years. It's including in our 5-year plan. The balance, the little bit at the end there is the end of North Macadam District. Everything pretty much wraps up by 22-23 with the exception of North Macadam. So by 25-26, there will be no new debt proceeds based on the current structure.
So we took a look at what it would mean on an urban renewal area by urban renewal area to go from 30% to 50%, and so I'm going to walk through what those opportunities and challenges are. The URA amendments that Tony referenced really established an end-of-life scenario and clarity for the Central East Side, North Macadam urban renewal area, and River District. So we have a very clear sense of what we anticipate expending within those districts through within the time period that Tony referenced. So within the Central East Side, we anticipate, housing anticipates putting about $9.8 million into the St. Francis and at the Clinton Triangle. If we were to move that up to 50%, we would need to find an additional $5.7 million. And the considerations there are that that really is an employment district. There are limited residential zoning and few opportunity sites. And But there are some sites, and if we needed to find the $6 million, that would come at the expense of either the infrastructure investments that we need in order to improve the Clinton Triangle or acquiring the ODOT blocks. Within the North Macadam urban renewal area, housing will be putting $47 million to work. The first project that we're moving forward with is Parcel 3. There are other opportunities both at the ZRZ property as well as they're pursuing and looking at additional property that TriMet owns. Because we're already at 42% at the end of the life of the district, the deficit is only $6.6 million. But remember that we do need taxable investment to unlock tax increment revenue in that district, and so that's a key priority. And at the end of the life of the district, we have potential resources hoping and anticipating that there is private development. And we believe that probably those resources will need to go towards the South Portal improvements. It's not a line item in the budget right now, but that's definitely a priority for the district. And finally, within the River District, housing is moving forward with development, and Javier can talk about that. We would need to find an additional $40 million, and that would come likely from Old Town Chinatown, the action plan there. There are limited opportunity sites, but there are considerable preservation and seismic needs. Any comments? Okay.
That's pretty much it.
So within the neighborhood urban renewal areas, Gateway, Interstate, and Lentz, we have more opportunity funds, and we have a bit more flexibility, although within Gateway, for example, it's a fairly resource-constrained district, and so housing will be putting about $10.6 million towards homeownership, home repair, and probably one last major project, maybe?
Hopefully, that's the goal.
That's the goal. We would need to find an additional $11.6 million to get up to the 50% goal. And that could come at the expense of additional street improvements along Halsey-Weidler or commercial redevelopment at the Gateway Transit Center. It's worth noting that market rate housing out there is affordable at 60%, so there might be a case where we would do a residential project at the 60% level that would be, that could help meet some of our objectives, joint objectives. Within Interstate, with the recent reallocation of $20 million, the deficit there would only be about $4 million. The North-Northeast Housing Investment Strategy has outlined a very robust set of projects, including the recently announced Grant Warehouse. There's also a big emphasis on homeownership, home repair, and some resources that have been set aside for land banking, although there's only $3 million. The impact would be limited if we needed to find additional resources of the $4 million within Interstate. Those would come from opportunity funds that we currently have for business finance and commercial property redevelopment loans. So there wouldn't be a significant impact, but it is worth noting that we did have to reallocate the $20 million. So those opportunity funds have been reduced within the last 2 years. Within Lentz, housing will be investing almost $30 million in affordable housing. We have some co-investments within the Lentz Town Center that you're familiar with. So the Palindrome Communities moving forward the Woody Guthrie project with Rose CDC. They're moving forward, plan to issue a NOFA this October as well. We would need to find an additional $14 million in order to meet the 50% goal. And so that might come at the expense of 92nd and Herald or floodplain mitigation if we needed to find and reallocate that entire body.
In general, what I would say is that within each of the urban renewal areas, as you have seen, obviously there's housing pressures as well, and understanding that there are some development needs. But there is some specific pressures that we have within, especially the neighborhood urban renewal areas that when we look at Interstate as an example and the displacement that has happened, that we need to make sure that we look at those opportunities and maximize those opportunities when we can.
So finally, we have 3 urban renewal areas which are effectively closed districts. These are no longer subject to the set-aside as we've already applied the set-aside to the new debt proceeds. But it's worth noting that housing is still making investments in these districts through preservation, and there are 2 NOFAs in 2015, as you see on the table here. PDC is also managing our program income and doing some final key projects in these areas and managing our assets, both to make sure that we support our financial sustainability and deliver on long-term priorities like the convention center hotel in these districts. So when we convened our Budget Advisory Committee last week, we asked for their opinion, and we really had a strong and robust conversation. We didn't reach consensus. We only had about an hour and a half, and so we heard really good comments, and I think we anticipate bringing people back at some point to hear what they think and to potentially come up with a recommendation at some point. But there was definitely consensus that affordable housing is a grave concern in Portland. So there was nobody who didn't agree that something needs to happen. I think there were questions about whether 50% was the right number. Some people felt like it was arbitrary. Why not 35? Why not 60? There was this question about what is the right number and how would you know if you had the right number. There were other people who have felt that we could achieve it strategically and it would take time to get there. There would be, you need to have some community process. There were a lot of questions around performance and policy implementation to date. So Javier has spoken to some of those, but how many units have been produced? What's the cost per unit? How are we benchmarking that with other cities? Questions to that effect. There were process considerations and recommendations. People felt like we really should have conversations that are specific to each urban renewal area, and that the community needs to better understand the trade-offs. So that feedback helped result in the table that we just presented to you. There were also questions about what the impact would be to taxing jurisdictions if by having additional investments in non-taxable affordable housing projects, we would actually send less resources back when the districts closed to the taxing jurisdictions, and whether there would be any impact to maximum indebtedness. And then there were some people who noted that the timing of this is a bit unfortunate, considering that we just went through a process of amending the 6 urban renewal areas. And then there were other people who felt that if you were seriously going to consider increasing the set aside to 50%, you might want to consider redrawing some of the boundaries so that you had more residentially zoned, that you had more residential opportunities within the districts. We also heard specific feedback on urban renewal areas and priorities. So as I mentioned, within North Macadam, the South Portal is a high priority, and we heard that from the stakeholders there. Central East Side, people felt that the infrastructure and economic development investments are consistent with the employment focus of that district and should be the priority there. Within the River District, there were comments made that there were potential opportunities to co-invest in affordable housing and market rate or commercial development in Old Town Chinatown, and recommended that we talk to the community about that. There was a sense that this shouldn't come at the cost of not acquiring the post office, so it should be a both and. We should look to acquire the post office and see if we could address some of our affordable housing needs and goals through that acquisition and redevelopment. There was a very clear sense that, particularly in East Portland, you're beginning to see some of the affordability pressures that we've seen closer in, and so that there might be opportunities to maintain or rehab existing multifamily units out there, that might be an effective use of resources. Within Interstate, we were urged to consider, with the recent reallocation of $20 million, what additional investment might be required. And then we heard from some of the Lentz constituents, both that we should consider maintaining or rehabbing existing multifamily buildings, and that there is a real need to make sure that we are making good on our commitment to have market rate commercial development at 92nd and Herald, and that if there were any additional resources, or that there are infrastructure priorities that remain that have yet to show up in the budget, and so they would prioritize those over affordable housing. So a very significant range of opinions, and we really appreciate the feedback that we received. So we put together 3 scenarios for your consideration as you begin your discussion, to illustrate, really just to help illustrate some of the options that you have as you consider your recommendation to City Council. So the first would be, like the Portland Housing Advisory Commission, you could determine that you would recommend changing the set-aside policy language and increasing it to 50% or 40%, or just making a change to the policy. That would, if you were to say 50%, you would be then directing staff to really accelerate the conversation about competing priorities, because there's no way that we get to $80 million without having, we can't just find $80 million in opportunity funds. There would be significant project trade-offs. And it's worth noting that there would be potential staffing implications at that level of reduction as well, that level of reallocation as well. Another scenario would be that you could recommend targeted adjustments. So as happened within the interstate urban renewal area, you could recommend a change to individual urban renewal areas and say recommend an increase of $30 million, maintaining existing priorities and determining areas of opportunity, and limit staffing impacts. Another scenario would be that you could recommend the initial staff proposal that PHB and PDC staff initially put forward to maintain policy language, strengthen reporting, secure additional resources to deliver on the operating components of the 0 to 30% units, reinforce 30% as a floor, and consider changes in the budget process. So again, those are just scenarios to help illustrate what you might consider. So again, the questions: what questions do you have? What additional information do you need? What changes would you recommend?
Does anybody have any questions of these folks before we take testimony? When does the study in housing come out?
It will be late September, early October when the second phase of this housing report comes out.
Any other questions for these three?
We ask them after.
We can bring them back up.
That would be.
Yep. All right. So we have Margaret Bax here, who is going to testify in support of the PHAC recommendation. Margaret? Welcome.
Thank you. Is this on?
It is.
Margaret Bax, 3435 Northeast 22nd, Portland, Oregon. I'll be brief today. I went over my time last time, so that's not going to happen again. I want to thank you all for your thoughtful consideration of this tax increment set-aside policy. I was part of the group that was working here at the city when it was initially conceived and adopted. And it's been really interesting in my retirement to sort of see how things continue to evolve. Just one thought I want to remind you, and I think you guys all know this really well, is that affordable housing development is economic development. You know, it does provide long-term family wage jobs throughout the community, from the professionals that are associated with the designing and building, engineers, architects, and of course all the laborers on the project. But also there are long-term family wage jobs with benefit associated with managing, operating, maintaining these buildings, particularly when we use our local companies, Walsh, PCRI, REACH. Some of these folks, for-profit and nonprofit, have been partners in building and maintaining our community for decades. And so sometimes we get into these discussions, you know, I think of Gretchen kind of pulling her hair out at times saying economic development and housing do not have to be in conflict. And so I'm just here today to reinforce that message and to say, yes, I do support the Portland Housing Advisory Committee recommendation to increase to 50% on terms of the tax increment set-aside resources. Thank you again. I'm happy to take any questions now or at any time.
Any questions, commissioners? Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks, Margaret.
Want to have staff and Javier back up?
Sure, Kelly, there was also some.
Yeah, the written.
Testimony, so Gina has sent 3 pieces of written testimony to distribute.
Questions for?
I have a few questions. First of all, I understand, and forgive me if I'm not using the right nomenclature here, but I understand that some funds that have been allocated for housing as part of the set-aside have not been deployed in certain years. It's money that's carried over, and I'm wondering how much that is on average and how that fits into the percentage calculation. So in other words, if that money were fully deployed, what would that do to the percentage analysis?
And Tony can speak better to the percentage component in terms of carry forward resources. We tend to try to combine resources years so that we have enough money to be able to make it work. So sometimes we have, for example, there will be a forecast for $1 million in a certain renewal area. It doesn't make sense to put that out there for development. So we'll try to create some type of amount that makes sense. And that's why we issue a notice of fund availability last year in March. That was our NOFA. We have not done anything since then, and we're proposing, because now we have sufficient resources that are TIF as well as federal that will allow us to, that will make sense. And so we're looking to issue a NOFA in October of this year.
And in response, Commissioner, to your question about percentages, if we look back at this graphic, this is a lot of numbers up here, but this shows cumulative progress on spending, but also takes into account all dollars that have not been spent yet or are in the forecast. So it would be about 34% to date. counting.
Aggregate, right.
Aggregate,
Got it.
right.
So it's a little over the 30, it's a little over the set-aside goal, yeah,
Correct.
in terms of the aggregate amount. Okay. And then in terms of, I'm curious about neighborhood stakeholders and how this proposal has been received to go from 30 to 50%. We saw some email testimony, but I'm just wondering, have there been other comments received by PDC staff about the trade-off? Because it seems to me, we're talking about a trade-off in priorities. And obviously, neighborhood stakeholders in all of these URAs are going to have different perceptions of what might be valuable and useful in their particular neighborhoods versus just a housing function. And I'm wondering what you've heard.
Yeah, so we've heard an array of comments. When we convened the Budget Advisory Committee, we heard, as I mentioned, both kind of general comments about the process, but then specific priorities that have been long held priorities within urban renewal areas, infrastructure projects, or those that are deemed catalytic. I think you've received some comments that are include some fairly strong opinions about Lentz and making sure that we move forward with commercial market rate development at the Lentztown Center. So we haven't heard a lot of information, but we have heard as well from people like Margaret who would like us to increase to 50%, so there's an array.
And then you mentioned in your presentation a staffing impact, and I'm wondering what the percentages might be or how that would play out in terms of, what $80 million would do to the PDC staff over the next 10 years.
Sure. Commissioner, we haven't done an in-depth analysis yet of what that would be. A lot of our projects require different levels of staffing, depending on programmatic or project requirements. But generally, that represents, I think, we looked at about a 15%, reduction in resources, but it's not going to be a one-to-one reduction. So it's hard to say at this point without doing further analysis.
Different areas of focus and expertise and so on.
Right. We'd have to really look at on a case-by-case scenario over the 10 years what it would require.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, we had this conversation this morning at the Financial Sustainability Committee and talked about percentage of our overhead relative to our overall budget. I mean, that's kind of that math. So at what overall budget level does our current operations make sense? The more you take out of that overall budget, the more we have an operation that isn't really justified. But beyond that, yeah, it's going to be in somewhere in that window. But as for actual staffing numbers, we're just not there yet.
Thank you.
If I can just speak to community feedback, specifically to Lens. We know and we heard, and especially from the East Portland Action Plan, that there is a tremendous amount of need for affordable housing in Lens, and understanding that there's another contingency that requests and desires to have affordable to market rate development, both commercial and rental, but that there is that voice that sometimes is not heard through the PDC channels, that I want to make sure that it's clear that it's there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Reed.
What do you estimate the shortage by? I think you had 3 categories up there: 0 to 30, 30 to 60, and perhaps 60 to 80. What do you estimate the shortage of units is across the city in those categories?
I don't have specific numbers, and we can bring that to you. And further, I can tell you that on each of the, looking at the 0 to 30, and if we could go back to that slide there, looking at the 0 to 30 goals, the only URA that we actually met that goal, and I'm going down my list here, is there are 2 downtown waterfront and South Park blocks on those units. Everything else we fell short.
I guess my interest is more around what is the need as opposed to what's our goal.
We, in terms of quantifying the need, we have an idea as to what the need is, and we can bring that back to you, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
Commissioner Myers?
Most of my questions have been covered, but what is the long-term solution for attaining the needed affordable housing that we have? I mean, what are some of the things we're looking at for the solutions?
Obviously, and I think that the graph that shows the TIF cliff that we've been talking about, TIF is not it. I mean, this is a broader conversation that we are having, especially when we're looking at the comp plan that planning is working on, and the number of units that we're looking at, affordable units in the city of Portland. And so the challenge that we have, and PDC has as well, is that we have a citywide mandate, but we have budget for 15% of the city. And so it is looking at those other opportunities and how do we leverage what is happening now in terms of need to make those a reality. There's certain strategies that we're working on that we will be bringing forth to City Council to address some of those things.
Also, just as we're looking at some of our scenarios, do you agree that maybe the scenario 2, where we look at everything on a URA by URA, would be helpful for the Housing Bureau? Because it seems like some areas obviously are easier to get the projects out the door than others. I mean, you have the same challenges that we have with projects. And then also, having kind of an open line of communication between our 2 bureaus, because we have people that come in here all the time. I mean, I've been on this board for a long time, and they have priorities and needs, and when you run out of resources, you can't meet all of them. So how do we come to like a common ground together as our 2 agencies?
Yeah, I think we agree in that we need to do some analysis on a URA by URA basis. Like I said earlier, not all URAs are created equal, so it makes sense to look at that. There are certain priorities that I know PDC and the city have on certain URAs that are beyond housing, and there are some priorities, housing priorities, that in some URAs that are beyond what the set-aside is. So most definitely.
And I just want to reiterate that it's really important for me that we have the opportunity to get a lot of these questions answered before I feel like we as a board can make a decision as to what should be decided. I mean, this is a huge change, and from what we've done in the past, and I mean, I literally would like to have almost every one of those questions that Kimberly addressed somewhat answered before we can actually make, to me, a reasonable decision in terms of how we move forward.
So if you 3 could stay up here, I think what we should do next is have a discussion, and I guess I would first of all echo what you're saying. I don't feel like I have enough information. I don't think there's anybody that disagrees that there's a huge need for affordable housing. But beyond that, we have a study on housing coming out. We have what seems like this, we got to do 50%, and it seems to me to be an arbitrary number. I think I would have to understand a lot better where the city is headed in general with housing, in the context of us just having our kickoff meeting today about the financial sustainability of this agency to make a decision, of this kind of magnitude before we go through that process is concerning to me. So those are my kickoff comments.
I would agree with everything that you and Commissioner Dixon said, so thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank staff for the great work. All the projects came before us today and all the issues. This is a really big, hairy, complex issue, and it's getting worse. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. You can't walk around the city without experiencing it. And the complexity around drugs, alcohol, chronically homeless, the social services that are needed to support those people. I'd really like to know what our capacity is to support those through our not-for-profit partners such as Central City and REACH that have done great work, as well as the county that's involved in this deeply. Because I think one part of the problem is building the sticks and bricks, which is needed. The other part is the social services for the ones that have faced unique challenges, I think. The other thing that complicates it, and this is a secondary issue, but I think it's a real issue in our city, and that is what some people refer to as the road warriors, or the just plain criminal element that's out there. Since I've joined this commission, I would have to say by probably 10x, the phone calls I get from business owners and organizations asking for help is around the safety of their employees throughout the Central City, particularly the park blocks, both north and south, and the close-in east side. I've had businesses tell me they've moved out because of it. I've had businesses as recently as this week suggest that they're thinking about moving out. Some may not. But I think, and it's probably lack of funding there as well, in terms of enforcing laws that are on the books that we don't have the staff to enforce. And I think that complicates the homeless issue as well. I think these are the two biggest issues and opportunities that I think we face as a city. I'd like to suggest you put out there 3 options. In this political season, it seems like it's a great opportunity for a politician at the city level to come forward with a notion that might be unique. And I don't see TIF as I really question the viability of TIF. Your slide 15 you had up there that shows that thing falling off in 5 years. This is a short-term potential. It's not even a solution in my mind. It's a potential short-term funding mechanism and nothing more. And I think as a city, we're kidding ourselves if we're looking for short-term solutions to what I think is a very long-term problem. It's not going away. I think coming out of this recession, the haves and have-nots have gotten further and further apart. And I think the challenge is only going to get bigger. I think we ought to add as an option a true long-term funding solution, such as taking it to the voters, add it to our property taxes, so it's there every year. So it's a reliable source of funds that you at housing can rely upon and plan predictably to try to meet the need once we know what the need is and try to quantify it and address that need. I think short of thinking of a long-term solution, I think we're just kicking the can down the road, and I don't think it's time to kick the can down the road. And PDC going through what they did in 2013, I can tell you from sitting on both sides of this table as a partner of PDC's and now sitting on this side of the table, we got 95 people working double time, and they're doing a darn good job with limited resources, no matter what anybody else says. And I think we've got a lot of demands on those resources, those people and their resources, and how hard can we push those people and expect them to continue to work under that kind of pressure. So I'd like to see a fourth solution put on the table. Thank you very much for the work.
I also think that several of the there's several alternative funding methods that I think need to be explored further for solving the affordable housing crisis. There are a few currently underway right now in the city that are using different funding methods to build the projects. And I think that needs to be explored further, and hopefully we can find another solution that will help, shore up our input on it.
So does that leave you with not knowing what to say?
So I think that I heard that we need to go back and shore up some of the questions and where there are answers, put those together. Probably work with our partners to think about when an additional funding scenario, resource development, when that might be available and when that would come forward. I think those are the two buckets. Patrick, anything
Well, I
else?
do think we should, and I think Jillian's still in the room, but, and I know Kurt can take a message back to Commissioner Saltzman, but I think part of what this is also communicating is this board, maybe others who are going to contribute to this conversation need time to have the conversation. So this board doesn't come back together again until October 14th. We can obviously get information in the interim, but the next opportunity to have a full conversation about this is going to be a month from now, and the council timeline has a decision being made immediately thereafter. So part of this is making sure that we communicate to council this conversation so that the council understands this is what's being deliberated here at this body. And like I said, there hasn't been a full community conversation. So we're hearing different voices, and those are real voices, but this hasn't been a committee process. So to the extent that that there's a desire to hear where people in different communities sit on this issue, we also haven't allowed for that. So whether or not council allows for that time, that's their decision, but I think we should also communicate that back to council as well.
Is it, in my understanding then, that at our next meeting, if we want to make a recommendation to council, that's going to be our time?
To fit the council's timeline, yes. It's like still conceivable that on the 14th of October, this board could act on something, make a recommendation. The questions that Commissioner Eland has raised, right? If we're going to have this in the context of a larger funding strategy, I don't know that that's where housing is going to be by that point. So that's why I think there's a tension on the time front.
And then just in terms of the challenge and we're looking at all other options in terms of affordable housing, to be at a level that can be part of the entire discussion and feel comfortable within the political environment that we're in, I'm not sure that would provide sufficient time, even if we were to extend it another 4 months, very honestly. And so that's the challenge associated with, are we looking at other funding mechanisms? We are, and we're definitely pushing forward, is that I'm not so sure that we'll be at the level that we can share to that end in order to get this completed.
There's a pretty fundamental question that Commissioner Eland asked is, what's the need? And I think we people in business always think in those terms. It's okay, what's our 5-year need? What's our 10-year? What's our 20-year need? So that we can, have an approach to the issue in a way that makes some sense.
Yeah, and one of the things...
Fundamentally, as a city, I think we owe it to ourselves to take a 10,000-foot look at this as opposed to a knee-jerk, and I'm not being critical, but a reaction to grab money to add to the pile and not think about it holistically in terms of how many people do we have that are homeless and what services do they need and how do we provide those, and then what's the best long-term mechanism to fund it so that it's there for the next 20, 30, 40 years as opposed to the next 5 years.
Sure.
Because that's all we're talking about. It's gone.
Right.
And just one more thing to add, and along this, just because we've talked about this internally, is we have demonstrated an ability to react to opportunities in collaboration. We've moved money to the set-aside side of the ledger because of these opportunities. So I don't think this process necessarily forecloses those opportunities. So to the extent that there's an opportunity to put money to work now, I don't think that this is saying that that can't happen. I think it's saying, what the board's saying is, do we have enough information to make this 5-year, 10-year decision, and maybe make it in a way that has kind of arbitrary numbers attached to it. I mean, I think there's, you can get more clarity on that issue and still take advantage of opportunities that exist now to get dollars out the door and units in production. I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank everybody who testified and input. Our next and final item is update on the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan and negotiations with the U.S. Post Office. We have Sarah Harpole, Tony Barnes, and Eric Jacobson.
Good evening. No.
Welcome. It is evening. Parking garage closes at 6, so I have to get out of here by then.
I talk quickly. We'll be fast. My name is Sarah Harpole. I'm a senior project manager in the Central City team in the Urban Development Department. I'm joined by Eric Jacobson, who is a senior project manager in the Real Estate and Lending team, and Tony Barnes, who is our budget officer. Together, we're going to provide you an overview of 3 interrelated initiatives: the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan, the status of negotiations with the post office site for potential acquisition of their downtown property, and then acquisition and public improvement financing approaches for those 2 initiatives. These 3 items are interrelated in that together they will help inform a decision around the acquisition of the post office site. And then together with the 4th initiative, which is the Central City 2035 plan. This document, which was adopted by City Council, directs PDC and partners to relocate the post office and redevelop the site, and has established performance guidelines that has helped inform our planning activities for the area. So first, I'm going to recap the work that we've been doing on the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan. As a quick reminder, the Framework Plan study area is a 24-acre site. It includes a number of PDC-owned properties and represents one of the most prominent opportunities for influencing the fabric of the city as well as the broader region. It's a multimodal hub, which includes the Union Station owned by PDC and offers an opportunity to reposition this station as a gateway to the city. The focus of the framework plan is threefold. One, it'll help guide PDC's investment in the study area, including a number of PDC-owned assets. It'll inform development concepts for the post office site and help inform the decision about whether or not to proceed with that acquisition. And it will also set the stage for a future master planning activity required by the Central City 2035 plan, should we decide to proceed with that acquisition. Also, as a quick refresher, we completed or are in the process of wrapping up now the work on the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan. It's kind of a 2-chapter process. The first was establishing the strategic vision for the entire 24-acre site. We focused on guiding principles for the area and understanding of the opportunities and constraints of that larger site. And then we focused on the 14-acre post office site, looking at preliminary development concepts and narrowing that down to a preferred concept for the post office site. Should we decide to move forward then with the acquisition, we would move forward with that more detailed master plan activity. So really at this point, it was really to help us inform that, again, that go, no-go decision before we got into more detailed understanding of the post office property. Just last night, we wrapped up our outreach process with our 3rd open house. So we've completed this work around 4 key work session or charrette opportunities. And we've been fortunate enough to be informed by this work with a lot of public input. So since June, we have had approximately 1,000 points of community feedback through work with our stakeholder committee, our technical advisory committee, 3 open houses, 2 online surveys, and then survey work that we've completed out in the field. We've also had a strong online presence through social media and then a number of profiles in the local media as well. There are kind of 2 key themes. We've had a lot of input, but 2 key themes that really has come out of this is one, the focus on the kind of the quality and the location of open space and connectivity through the site. And the other is around the preference for increased height and density at important key nodes within the property. Also, given the emphasis that we've heard on the quality and appropriate uses within the public open space, we hired a firm, Design and Culture Lab, to go out in the field to do intercept surveys. They worked on key max and transportation lines in Northeast and Southeast Portland, went to the Moving the Park in Overlook Park and the Portland Saturday Market to do one-on-one surveys to help us understand what made people feel comfortable or uncomfortable within public spaces. And we heard mixed results of whether income and race was a factor, whether someone felt space was inclusive for them. And when people didn't feel comfortable in public space, it was largely due to areas being dark or not well lit, high areas of drug and alcohol abuse, high crime, or congested areas and areas with large crowds and not adequate pedestrian passageways. So these are the key themes for us to kind of continue to understand and dig into if we move forward with the master plan process, given kind of the importance of adequately working public realm within the space and making sure it's inclusive for the broader region. So last time I was before you to provide an update, we were just wrapping up the work on the strategic vision, so I'm going to kind of quickly recap this section of our work. We had established a vision statement for the area that spoke to this being a once-in-a-generation chance to transform downtown and the multimodal hub. It was in a unique Portland way to honor the history, cultivate culture, and build density and diversity, and reimagine how Portlanders live, work, enjoy, and move through the city. We also established guiding principles for the area and a set of underlying objectives that would speak to how we could deliver on these values. And this would establish a framework that would help inform future decisions, development solicitations, and eventually the master plan as well. We focused on how the built form both respects and strengthens the character of the adjacent neighborhoods and identified unique opportunities to create these meaningful public spaces. We called out 3 in particular, one at the top of the Broadway, what we call the Bridge Y, at the top of the Broadway Bridge, and creating an overlook and a cascade walk down into the space. The door to Union Station and the plaza area that we could activate in a more productive and meaningful way than it is currently operating. And then the North Lawn, which is adjacent to PNCA, and creating an extension of the park blocks into the space. And then focusing on connectivity into the adjacent neighborhoods, particularly around Johnson. We also looked at phasing. You can see here the blue squares represent the first phase opportunities. 2 key takeaways here was, one, the value that the interim use of the existing post office space could provide. This was cost neutral, but it added significant site activation in the near term with up to 1,500 jobs being provided on the space. It also offered an affordable commercial opportunity, which we heard was very important, as it provided an opportunity that might not otherwise be available in some of the Class A office spaces that might be provided in the new construction. Secondly, Johnson Street was key in early phases of development to provide that connectivity both to the Pearl District, back to Union Station, and then into Old Town Chinatown. So then we shifted to focus more specifically on the post office site itself. We started with providing 5 preliminary concepts to stakeholders to provoke input on both urban form and program mix. We heard both from our open houses, our committees, and a very popular online survey that the Cascade, Stitch, and Weave were the most popular concepts. We took elements of these concepts based on the feedback we received and created 3 hybrid concepts that focus both on the urban form and varying program mixes, and tested these from a more technical standpoint, looking at transportation, sustainability, performance, and financial feasibility. I should say then, whoops. Then we narrow those down into a singular preferred concept that responded both from an urban form and a feasibility analysis. Each of the concepts that we tested had the same development underlying framework as we move forward. So it had a modified street grid that focused on two primary points of access, Park Avenue and Johnson Street. It should be noted that these are 80-foot wide right-of-ways instead of the standard 60-foot right-of-way. They're intended to operate something more like open space and being a multimodal street that provides a more active environment. Extension of 2 park blocks into the space, and then maintaining some permeability in the space through pedestrian and bike access ways through the private parcels as well. In our cost analysis, we also assumed a set aside of 25% of the residential FAR in each of the concepts for affordable housing. We went through then a financial analysis, and in doing so with the help of HRNA and Eco Northwest, we did a pro forma model to determine the residual land value by use for the concepts and market data to project the rate of absorption and potential land sales based on phasing. We also used cost estimates for a core set of the public benefits, including the affordable housing, which is providing 2 components, one, the FAR, the development rights set aside, as well as the unit subsidy that's required to buy each of the affordable housing units, estimated at $100,000 per unit. We've included the open space that I just walked through, as well as the streets, and then the acquisition of the site itself. This allowed us to determine to what extent adequate resources were available through those land values and the TIF currently in our budget for each of these scenarios. We've also assumed the interim use of the post office building in all of the assumptions. This exercise highlighted the philosophy that's illustrated in this diagram, in that the vision of the program generated the financial resources that helped buy the public benefits that were desired on the site, which then again creates the vision that was desired. And changing each of these variables has a rippling effect throughout this analysis. Key findings from this analysis indicated that a balance between the residential uses, which had the higher land value, along with our economic objectives, was the right balance from a program standpoint, and that emphasizing residential development in phase 1 helped maximize public benefits that were necessary to achieve the rest of the vision in phase 2. And coordinating infrastructure and open space investments with private development was most financially viable, and that we needed to identify additional strategies to support affordable housing development. It should also be noted that from a transportation analysis standpoint, it was not a deciding factor, as they were comparable in each of the scenarios, and sustainability modeling indicated preference also for a more balanced program between residential and commercial. This allowed us to define the preferred concept, both from in an urban design concept. So here we've identified again the opportunities to highlight and activate Union Station with the plaza potentially out front, and opportunities to activate under the Broadway Bridge Viaduct, the multimodal streets along Park and Johnson, and then the active and vibrant park spaces. So these were modeled comparable to, as far as a cost standpoint, comparable to what you would see at Jameson Park as far as a high-quality active public space. Program mix, again, this is a balanced 1-to-1 jobs and residential mix, about 8 million gross square feet. This represents just under 7-to-1 FAR across the entire post office site, and just under 2,000 parking spaces with an opportunity for about 20% shared parking across the site. This also included the set aside for 25% of residential FAR for affordable housing, which is approximately 600 units within the development. This generates land sales over 10 years of about $113 million and assumes public investment of approximately $51 million over 12 years. Again, it assumes the interim use of the post office building and the dedication for affordable housing, which adds at no cost as far as land value assumption. So this illustrates on the right the base cost for those core set of public benefits. Again, the affordable housing set aside from an FAR standpoint, the 65,000 square feet of parks, the 2 streets, Park Avenue and Johnson, the extension of the Green Loop bike and pedestrian path into the site, and the 4,000 jobs. The top lighter pink is a list of additional public benefits that we've heard would be desired on the site. So this is the subsidy for providing those affordable housing units within that set aside square footage, which is about $65 million. There's also been a discussion of a greater mix of incomes with housing within the site, commercial affordability over a longer term beyond just the interim use of the post office building, additional improvements into Union Station that are currently unfunded within our budget, carbon neutral infrastructure from a district-wide perspective, and/or additional infrastructure investments that might not currently be included in our cost estimates. Tony, in a minute, will walk through kind of some of our assumptions around financing for this project, but on the left, this represents the sources that the project may generate by 2028 through land sales and investment, so an additional $60 million potentially in tax increment financing through the district. And then the SCCs generated once the site is fully developed is approximately $39 million. Should all of those resources be available for the site, it shows kind of how you might have a conversation about financial trade-offs and priority benefits for this location. So lastly, I'm going to walk quickly through some slides where we've tried to establish some measures of success moving forward and what we might use again for the framework plan and for our development solicitations. Across the bottom, you'll see the key words from those guiding principles that we started the presentation with, and we've tried to identify the public benefits that we think are delivered or match those values. So in public realm and transportation, the delivery of 2 new parks, the exchange place adjacent to Union Station, and the plaza at the top of the Broadway Y. Additional pedestrian, bike, and auto connections on Johnson Park Avenue and the Green Loop extension. New cycle tracks all along Broadway and Lovejoy in addition to the Green Loop connection, and then maintaining pedestrian connectivity through the private development parcels. Decreasing mode split to 85%, primarily through increasing bike, pedestrian, and transit use within the area. And then sustainability, 50% reduction in potable water use and energy use, an 85% landfill diversion, again, the 85% non-SOV mode split, and then fulfilling the city's target of net zero carbon goals by 2030. And then shared prosperity, delivering a mixed income community on this site with 25% of the residential units, affordable housing units, providing commercial space to firms with middle income wages or higher, and then also providing commercial space for firms owned by underrepresented populations looking to grow in the central city, meeting PDC's contracting requirements of 20% or higher construction performed by minority-owned, women-owned, disadvantaged, and emerging small businesses. Providing job density goals on site targeted at 300 jobs per acre, which is on par or higher than the CBD. The Pearl District currently is at about 90 jobs per acre, just to kind of give you a contrast between the adjacent neighborhoods, and providing approximately 4,000 jobs in final build-out. And then we're calculating targets for private investment leverage and property tax generation. I will hand it over to Eric to talk about post office negotiations.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, Chair Kelly, Commissioners. My name is Eric Jacobson with the Real Estate and Lending Team. You'll recall that this past April, the board authorized staff to enter into exclusive negotiations with the Postal Service leading to the possible acquisition of the downtown post office site. So I'm going to give you a summary of what we've been doing over the past 5 months and a picture of what we're intending to do in the near future, and coming back to you with some decision items. As I talk about the work we've been doing, so we're intending to acquire the downtown facility. It's important to note that acquisition of the property by PDC is contingent upon the Postal Service's ability to relocate those operations to another facility. So we're going to talk about the relocation, and the Postal Service is really on the lead on identifying a relocation site and what that facility needs. PDC is more in a support role. And it's important that you understand that the Postal Service is really an engaged partner on this. They've been really actively pursuing this, and we've made a lot of progress. So the first thing we did is we did enter into the 2 agreements you authorized. One is an exclusive negotiation agreement, and the other is an escrow agreement. And through that escrow agreement, what PDC did is we funded an escrow account with $500,000 payment. That's essentially our first payment towards acquisition of the downtown facility. And what the Postal Service is doing is they're using those funds to pursue due diligence on the relocation facility. And we're agreeing upon what those tasks are and the costs. And as those costs are incurred, it's important to note that all of those costs are applicable to the purchase price should PDC acquire the downtown facility. So some of the work that the Postal Service has done is include site utilization studies, preparing cost estimates, evaluating the environmental condition of alternative relocation sites, and other similar due diligence items. They are looking at more than one site within the Portland metropolitan area and both sites inside the city and outside of the city. Through all this work, we're intending to identify a preferred relocation site, what the cost of the facility will be, of the replacement facility will be, the terms under which that relocation site will be acquired, how the replacement facility will be constructed and for how much, and what a retail services plan looks like. So I want to talk about two of those elements. First is we talk about the PDC cost allocation. In your board report, we talked about the maximum cost to PDC not exceeding $80 million. That's based upon our current information, and the Postal Service is looking at not just possibly replacing their current operations, but possibly expanding and consolidating operations that they have elsewhere in Portland. So it's possible the relocation facility will be larger than the current downtown operation. So the total cost of that facility might exceed $80 million, but that the PDC share of it will only be attributable to replacing what's currently in operation downtown. Secondly, on the retail services plan, the Postal Service operates both the retail and distribution facility, but there's also the customer service component where people can go in and buy stamps and mailing materials and mail their packages. The Postal Service intends to keep that retail facility somewhere in that area. So as part of the purchase and sale agreement's terms, we would need to solve for that and keep that facility downtown. So in terms of the work, we've sort of broken it up in four major components. We're currently in the due diligence phase. We're expecting two things to come out of that. One is a preferred site, and the second is a purchase and sale agreement that would come back to the board sometime in the next couple of months, and that purchase and sale agreement would address all those terms I just discussed. Once that agreement is authorized by the board, the next phase would be the Postal Service to prepare a bid solicitation package that would include a 30% design of the replacement facility that would be put out for contractor bids. And from those bids, that would establish the actual acquisition cost to PDC for the downtown facility. And then the next phase after that would be acquisition and construction of the replacement facility. We currently envision that happening someplace from the middle of 2016 to the beginning of 2017. And that really depends upon a number of factors. Does the sites under consideration have different pre-development needs that need to be looked at and examined? So that's all part of the work we're doing now. And by the time we have a purchase and sale agreement, we'll have a better, more firm estimate of when construction would begin and end. But right now, our estimate would be sometime in 2019, the replacement facility would be constructed, the Postal Service would be relocated with the exception of the retail component, and PDC would have control of the downtown facility. So we've made significant progress over the past 5 months. We expect to have the purchase and sale agreement's terms come together in the next couple of months. As I mentioned, the Postal Service is really taking the lead on examining what that replacement facility, the needs of that facility are. We expect to have a purchase and sale agreement to you in the coming months. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tony to talk about some of the financial implications.
Great. Thanks, Eric. So I've distributed an updated 5-year, actually a 10-year plus forecast for the full River District budget. And what this shows is a forecast that's a bit different than what we distributed back in June when we adopted the budget and 5-year forecast. So the existing River District resources are insufficient to carry the acquisition of the post office site, the full up to $80 million figure, alongside all other commitments and priorities until the post office site would be sold and PDC receives sale proceeds from the sale. The 5-year forecast includes $35 million related to the post office. But the 5-year forecast before you here shows $80 million for acquisition and about $30 million for infrastructure, an additional $30 million for infrastructure. And then later, past the 5-year forecast, there's a phase 2 with additional dollars for infrastructure. So what this results in is an interim potential deficit in the 5-year forecast, where we have a deficit of up to around $40 million because of the additional dollars that are being programmed related to the acquisition and development until the sale would occur. So this model, as I pointed out in the graphic, and as well as you can see under the sale proceed line items for the forecast before you, assume there's a phase 1 sale in the 5-year forecast, and then, I'm sorry, in 21-22, but then also a phase 2 sale in 25-26. So we really have a deficit in that 5-year forecast where we have existing priorities such as Centennial Mills, 10th and Yam Hill project, the existing housing set aside, as well as the investment in the post office. And related to Sarah's discussion about affordable housing, investments into affordable housing that would result, and related to the post office transaction, where you see additional resources right now, according to this forecast, is really on the tail end of this forecast, where we have additional resources coming in past fiscal year 25-26. You can see with a later sale assumption, there's more resources coming in. Those resources aren't programmed and could be made available for different priorities. So a little bit more on interim financing. So PDC is working closely with the City's Office of Management and Finance to identify interim financing that could help this deficit. Will likely would require some sort of city general fund backed interim financing. It hasn't been specifically identified yet. We're looking at what kind of mechanism this would be. But what would be required is that in order to back up the line of credit or interim financing, there would have to have a site valuation where we confirm the value, the as-is value, as well as the future value. There'd be an approval from City Council, and the resources from this interim financing would be used to fund public projects already programmed, the commitments already in the 5-year forecast. So we'd be using TIF for the acquisition of the site and using the interim financing to fund existing public infrastructure investments as well as infrastructure related to the post office. And this is because any type of financing that's coming from the city general fund would require those proceeds to be used on public type projects. And ultimately that interim financing would be paid off using the sale proceeds of the site. So a little bit more about the sources and uses, how that would break down, and that's related to the forecast before you. Right now, the 2 buckets on the left are what's in the 5-year forecast, which includes River District tax increment resources, but also program income from PDC resources, such as property sale income, rental income, as well as loan portfolio income. So in our 5-year and longer-term forecast for River District, those resources exist and have expenditures funded. So with interim financing, to cover the potential deficit, we would allocate all River District TIF, the remaining $160 million in capacity for River District TIF towards post office site acquisition, some remediation or infrastructure, Old Town Chinatown action plan. The original commitment, $16 million remaining for Multnomah County, and the $29 million or so for affordable housing, part of the set aside. River District program income, which amounts to over $30 million, would be reserved for paying any carrying costs with a line of credit or interim financing tool and ongoing property management we have with assets that PDC continues to carry. Then the third piece here, which we're discussing, is interim financing. And as I mentioned, this would be used for carrying any public improvements, such as Centennial Mills, 10th and Yam Hill, Union Station, and the new allocation for Multnomah County as a result of the the funding swap with the courthouse that was approved back in June. And that interim financing would have to be paid off with the sale proceeds from the post office. Can I answer any questions on that or the forecast?
I don't think we have any questions. Is this the end? Are you done?
We have next.
A quick recap of next steps. We are briefing City Council through a similar work session next week, as well as the Planning Sustainability Commission. In October, then we'll be back before you, we hope, with a resolution to move forward on approving the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan, as well as authorizing the purchase and sale agreement with the post office. And then similarly with City Council, the same day on October 14th for the first reading, and then October 21st, their adoption of the framework plan and authorizing interim financing mechanism. And then should all of those actions move forward, we would come back before you on November 18th to authorize any revisions necessary to the PDC budget.
Okay, no questions for these talented people?
And let me just take the opportunity to, because I just want to make sure, because Tony went through it and did it in a way that kind of allowed people to see it at a high level, but the interim financing mechanism obviously deals with this deficit that Tony talked about. These are just projections, right? So the assumptions that go into this include value, the value of the property, well, it's the assumption about what it's going to take for us to actually purchase it, and that's still a variable number. We've given you a maximum of 80, but that number could be something, what it's going to take to invest in it, what we're going to get on the back end for the property based on the assumptions that Sarah laid out from all the different public benefits, and then the timing of all that is also a massive assumption in this. And depending on when all these things happen on this 10-year horizon, it actually changes the deficit. And so what we've shown here is what we believe to be a fairly conservative estimate, and that's the conversation that we'll have with the city, which is what's a comfortable financing mechanism that we can all agree to that would give us the room to do this, but it could end up that it plays out in a way in which we need very little additional financing, or it could bump up against the upper. So I just want to make sure that what we're doing here is the best, our best guess right now, based on everything we know, but also being conservative. So we're pushing out, we're accelerating expenditures, we're pushing out money coming back in just to show what where it really caps out. But I don't want this $40 million number to be like, oh, you said it was $40 million and it ends up being, because that's really what we're working with, is what we presented to you just now. And when we present it to council next week, we'll give them the same set of assumptions. But those assumptions are going to change over time, obviously, with the biggest one being what we're able to recoup 5-10 years out as we slowly dispose of these properties. Once again, you can see the level of work that's gone in to get to that, but it's still assumptions. So.
And so the assumption of housing is based on our current policy?
Well, you guys can answer the question. It's a different, yeah.
So the assumption of set aside, the 25% set aside of FAR, was intended to mirror the discussions that are underway right now on adjustments to the FAR bonus system. So they were looking at a similar tool. So it was kind of our starting point, and also looking at what we thought might financially be viable of setting aside that amount of development opportunity. And then the assumptions, the Portland Housing Bureau provided them the separate assumption of the $100,000 per unit as their average investment in a housing unit today.
So the cash flow that you see here assumes that we continue to give 30% of new money to housing.
Okay.
Then we take on this project, and out of this project, we're allocating basically 25% is of the development potential on that. So when we calculate the assumptions about the value of the land as we dispose of it, it's actually taking into account that 25% is not available for private development. So there is a value to that 25% that's already baked into the numbers here. What we showed in an earlier slide is, in addition to that, there would still need to be subsidy to develop on those sites, and that there's not an answer to that yet, although there are potential options. One of them could be on the back end, money that ends up coming back from the sale of the property, which becomes surplus for the River District, is contributed to that, or it could be that housing, once again, this is 8-10 years out potentially. By that time, hopefully, housing has figured out there are other funding solutions, and so they may actually have funding that's outside of TIF. But the 25% that's allocated is baked into this assumption. So presume it's a covenant or something that's attached to however this gets sold. Yeah. Right. So TIF paying for infrastructure, right, when SECs would come in from those developments and would be available to pay for the same infrastructure. So that's, and you can swap it out, but that's another pot of money that would be potentially available for whatever. This is an attempt to say affordable housing is obviously the primary public benefit topic right now, and it will be for a long time. But there's other issues that we could potentially decide to address on this site. And this $100 million of either real or in-kind money is available for that conversation.
A couple of questions and maybe a couple of comments. Has there been any discussion about doing anything over the railroad tracks, a High Line?
We identified the opportunity to we explored it briefly, and we identified the opportunity primarily to get up to the top of the bridge Y, knowing that there's a connection, albeit not a fantastic one currently, to get down across the other side of the tracks from the bridge currently. We do have a diagram that has identified 4 opportunities to reach the river from the site, some of them that are there today and some that are aspirational, but it has been explored in a limited way.
Before the 25% housing, just kind of rough cowboy math, I think you said 3.8 million square feet of FAR feet at roughly, I think you had 35 for commercial and 50 something for residential. You didn't need to go back to it, but using $45 a foot, that's about $180 million in value, excluding the set aside for housing.
Yeah, we had 55 to 65 square foot for residential and about 35 for commercial.
Have we had any discussions out in, I want to say the brokerage community, but with some people that have vision beyond the city of Portland? I'm not saying Portland doesn't have a lot of great people in the brokerage community, but just strikes me that this is the kind of project that's going to get attention from all corners of the country and beyond. And it also strikes me that there might be some really interesting input in terms of how a deal might be structured to avoid having to go out for any interim financing. And I'm just wondering if we've got any feedback around that, or if we hopefully intend to.
So we've had, with HRNA, they have done some thinking around what are financing sources. Their first task was really to demonstrate whether the project was financially viable, whether it could support itself. And so we have not tasked them to take a deep look into additional sources. And then as far as looking to the brokerage community, we've had some conversation with developers who have worked in larger communities and have expressed some interest in larger scale developments, particularly in the commercial arena, and have expressed interest in larger floor plate office projects as well.
So I would think that there are folks out there that would be willing to put their money up today.
Yeah, we've been, some introductions have been made too.
That might make our world easier. The other thing that strikes me is thinking back on the earlier conversations that we've had, the meeting we were in this morning, Tom. You know, this is a terrific opportunity to look at different models in terms of PDC's role. Do we retain ownership and do a land lease? I think this is probably one of the very few pieces of property in town where that you could potentially affect that. How does that impact PDC and funding and long-term sustainability and so on and so forth? Could we create enough value out of it so that we can clear our costs and still have an ownership piece? Or, you know, what are the different structures out there? Or are there pieces of this that make sense for to remain in public ownership, such as we've done in other places in the city, such as parking?
And then the other thing that strikes me is, coming, not to beat a dead horse, but we're addressing affordable housing. I think we've got to address the park blocks. If I'm flying in town from New York, looking at financing this, and I go down there at 8 or 9 o'clock tonight and go down to Park Kitchen and have a nice dinner and go walk out there and I get accosted by somebody, I'm not so sure I'm coming back to town.
I think that's one of the key takeaways from both our one-on-one interviews as well as a lot of our public input is kind of safety in public spaces.
That's it. Great work. Really complex project. Really big and hairy. Really great work.
I had just a couple really quick questions. First of all, I would just say, I would echo that. Great work. I think you've done a great job, your whole team. This is really a fascinating project, and it's cool. So thank you. First, I wondered if the preferred development concept really has legs to it. I mean, how do you think that'll play out? That's number one. Number two, this is more of a nitty-gritty question or comment, kind of along the lines of having a dinner at Park Kitchen and not getting accosted. What about schools? Schools don't seem to be addressed much these days with all the additional density. We're seeing it in Northwest Portland, lots of new density, the Pearl density. Now we're talking about a huge development here. And it strikes me that, Lincoln High School is just overrun. There's talk about some type of a new development there. Chapman is totally overrun. It just seems like somewhere in this conversation there ought to be discussion of what the school resources should be. So, thank you.
So we had a representative, the Chief Operating Officer from Portland Public Schools on our Stakeholder Advisory Committee, as well as representatives from PNCA and PSU on our advisory committee. And we heard a lot of interest in schools as a use within the site. Portland Public Schools has indicated so far that this is not one of their kind of key priority locations. Currently, we've been strongly encouraged to keep exploring that through the master plan process. And I think that would be one of the benefits you would add to the top of this list to the extent you would want to kind of buy that benefit through either Portland Public Schools or an additional educational provider or use, or how you could mix that with additional public benefits such as a library or a community center or something like that. So I think that's something we can continue to explore. And to also get to your first question, we would look at those, I think, through the master plan process. And so what we've done is basically outline kind of the skeleton of the vision and what the kind of key elements are. Should we decide to move forward with the acquisition of the post office site, we would put out a request for proposals to bring on a development partner to work with us through that master planning process. And so that's where I think you really start to have someone with some skin in the game and really bringing their vision to the table that will help inform a more detailed master plan process. And then also having some conversations around what are these trade-offs and public investment, and starting to reach out to partners such as schools and other providers in more detail.
So just to tag on to that, one of the things I've always thought about this is what's the public attraction? I mean, affordable housing, the park are great public amenities, highly sustainable development, which I applaud you for, is a public benefit, but it's kind of like the Armory was with Portland Center Stage or the Art Museum. Now, those are already taken. But it just strikes me this would be a great place to have a destination, and I don't know what that would be, but maybe through that process. And then the second comment on bringing a development partner as part of the master planning process, do you envision that to go out with an RFP to select a development partner to actually develop it and have them then become part of the planning process?
Yes, we need to work out the specific details, and I think we'll get additional feedback from our consultant team. HRNA, SOM, and ZGF and others have started to raise some ideas in both with our internal team of the exact approach and details of this, but I think we would definitely go through a competitive process through an RFP, whether we seek a single master development partner or a partner who may have first rights to some portion of the site, how exactly that works out and what rights they have upon selection. But I think the goal would be to have somebody at the table who helps create that vision and then is responsible for implementing at least some portion of that.
I think that's an interesting notion that has two sides to it. We all know that, whatever master plan you come up with, whoever develops it's going to do something different. I mean, they're going to have parts and pieces of it they're going to use, but they're going to do something different for what they want. So bringing them on early gives you more application of that. The only point I would ask or suggest maybe we think about is when do we create the most value? If we, and I don't know the answer, but just food for thought, if we wait longer to bring somebody on closer to when it would happen, do we create more value by doing that? Looking at Tony, the flip side is bringing somebody on earlier and having them put a whole boatload of money on the table, you know, alleviates the financial stress. And just what's the optimum calculus in there?
And you know, on the financial side, if we have a deficit and we have an agreement with the city and the city puts its money at risk, that's going to be short-term money, relatively speaking, not as risk tolerant. To the extent that we minimize that and it's TIF money, which is long-term patient money, then we have more flexibility to do what you're talking about. So figuring out how to minimize the amount that the city's on the hook for is actually helps us in that quest. The city's not going to have the same level of patience that we are. They just won't.
Okay, I think it's probably time to wrap up things, right? I have one commissioner who wants to wrap things up. I could tell by the body
Back
language.
to school night. I've got to
Yes.
get there.
So unless there's any further business, we are adjourned.
Thank you.